that advances PowerPoint to the next slide that I could borrow. I didn't bring mine with me. Do you? Ah, thank you. Ready? Okay, my name is Chris McEvoy, and it's my pleasure to be talking about these 4 topics that have to do with entrepreneurship and development of turning an idea into a business. And I hope we have a little fun with it. A little bit about me, so you have some idea of my speckled past. I have a BS and an MBA from a little southern school in southern Indiana called IU. And then I graduated from there and went to work for General Motors, the largest corporation in the world at the time, back when it was General Motors. Today it is General Motors. And so I was working for them at really their prime, and there was a lot about that I loved. It was, there was a place to learn best practices. I liked the people very much. I loved the work. I was hired in as a programmer, and that was back when companies trained people how to program, that the universities hadn't taken that up yet. And so this went on for 3 or 4 years, and then I began to pay a little more attention to the people around me, and I discovered that the people who are about my age plus 5 years seemed to have no spark. They were just kind of plodding through life day at a time, and as I got to know them, I would ask them, do you enjoy what you're doing? No, not really. Well, why don't you do something else? Oh, I couldn't. I've got a wife and kids, and I just couldn't do that. And by the way, the General Motors retirement program is so good, I couldn't possibly leave. And my conclusion was that here were people 33 years old-ish, and they'd already retired. And I thought, this is no place for me. This is not where I intend to spend much more time. And so at the end of 5 years, I broke loose, and at the age of 29, started my own company, which was a software company, based on some of these best practices that I had learned at General Motors. About 2.5 years in, they had brought in a completely new software development platform. And initially, having been trained in the much more difficult old style, I was a little bit upset that suddenly automation was taking over stuff that I know how to do. And then my MBA training kicked in, and I thought, wait a minute. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's better. What's not to like? So as I began plotting my escape from General Motors, I thought what I should do is find an industry that is still using the older platform, of which most were, and develop software for them using the newer platform. So that was really kind of how things started. One of my cardinal rules was that I had to hire people better than myself. And I had a good high opinion of myself, but believe me, there were people better. And my company then, my very young company, had no money. We did have an unfair advantage that we mercilessly pursued, and we ended up being financed by banks, by angel investors, and by venture capitalists. And ultimately, we grew to $70 million in revenues and 350 employees, and we had places around the world running our software. So it was really a very interesting run. It was great fun. It never seemed like an easy task to meet payroll. And when you have 350 people, that's one heck of a payroll to meet. And finally, we were purchased by an international company, Swiss reinsurance company, that is the second largest reinsurer in the world. And so it had a very happy ending to it. We had several employees who walked away with six-figure payouts from their stock options. And so by all measures, I would consider the company to have been a real success. After the purchase, I stayed on for a couple years and then moved on. It's rarely a good idea for the original owner to stay on very long. You stay on long enough to make sure that the people who bought it kind of have their bearings, but that's about the length of time that I felt was appropriate, and that's what I did. So 10 years ago, I founded some other businesses. One of the negatives of having a successful business the first time out of the box is that you don't know any better. You think that this is just how they work. And that, believe me, is a negative, because I learned the hard way that this isn't how they all work, that the norm is failure. Having a success is somewhat rare. Not rare, but unusual. So I had some other businesses. Some were successful, some were not. And about 10 years ago, I started a consultancy called, Wingspan Thinking, which works with businesses looking to grow. And I became a SCORE mentor. SCORE is run by the Small Business Administration, and it provides free consulting to any U.S. citizen who wants to talk about anything that has to do with business. And so typically they come into an office and you meet with them for an hour. I did that for a number of years and then became very dissatisfied because so many times people would make appointments and not cancel. I mean, they would not let us know they weren't coming in. And so I began doing it strictly by email when I can do it on my own terms and in my own time. And so I still do it. 10 years ago, I began teaching, first time ever, in Purdue's Entrepreneurship and Innovation program. My father taught journalism at IU, and that was as close as I had come to any experience in teaching, was having a dad that did it. And I have found this to be just a tremendously fulfilling thing to do, and it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy people like you. I get a real charge out of it. So our program has grown to be one of the biggest in the U.S., and what really makes it different is that second point. Most entrepreneurship programs belong to the School of Business, sometimes the School of Engineering. And when this program was set up, probably about 15 years ago, it was decided by President Jischke, who was the president at the time. He said, I do not want this program to belong to any school because I want students from anywhere at Purdue to feel they can come to this program if they have an idea they would like to commercialize, which I thought was brilliant. And the other benefit is that we don't have a homogeneous group of students. We have people from every major at Purdue, and the students themselves talk about, we work in teams, and the students themselves talk about how beneficial it is to have differing points of view, differing backgrounds. And I have seen that myself. Any questions about anything so far? Okay, let's race ahead. I'm going to talk about business models. The old thing that used to be taught was business plan, business plan, business plan. And that has been pretty much kind of pushed aside. They're still necessary, but it's not what you focus on as a startup. A startup needs to focus on a business model which has a very, very simple objective. Look for an idea that you can validate that can turn into a good business. And that's all you're concerned about, the elements of a good business model. And so we'll kind of, back in 2010, something called the Business Model Canvas came out, which depicts on one piece of, a pretty good sized piece of paper, it depicts these 9 business requirements. And almost any type of business, regardless of what it is, one way or another are going to have to respond to each of these various things. And it ended up being a kind of a revolution over how people had been doing this in the past. And you'll see some more. Okay, here is one that really kind of describes what each one of these blocks mean. Value proposition, what value do we deliver to the customer? Which one of our customers' problems are we helping solve? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Cost structures, revenue streams. If you look at the left side of the business model, you're looking at cost, things that eat money. If you look at the right side, you're looking at things that bring in money. And then in the middle is your, what I like to call the unfair advantage. It's your business proposition. Why should people do business with you instead of somebody else? And if somebody starting a business has trouble answering that question, they need to stop and rethink it, because they should be very clear on what is it I do better than anybody else. Here is an example. This is Car2Go. You've probably all heard of that. They're these little tiny cars that seat 2 people. And this kind of briefly talks about what Car2Go looks like in terms of the business model. So then, and these were 2-seaters and very useful for cities like Chicago, New York. People having a meeting somewhere could rent a Car2Go, go to the meeting, come back, ride the subway home. So then the question was, what if we developed a 4-seater? What would be the implications of doing that? And so the addition to the value proposition was providing the option for larger cars. This is supposed to be a little better showing up as a different color, but you can see all the things that had to be considered when they began doing this. And it's just a way of helping you make sure that you kind of turn every stone over and examine it and make sure that you've got what you need. Any questions? Now, what we do in our classes is the teams each pick an idea. I mean, they work into an idea. They do research, they do all kinds of stuff, and finally they come up with the idea they're going to use for the rest of the semester. And then we, as they give, please.
Have you heard of a mission model canvas? And if so, like, are these 2 things different? Because they seem similar.
I have not heard of a mission model, but this has been so popular, I would imagine there are some offsprings to it. So I'll see if I can find something out about it. It really has become a very well-known tool, and you will probably see it more in the future. Let's turn our attention now to the startup environment. Agile, how many of you have heard of the term agile development? Okay, and it's discussing a way of very quickly iterating in small chunks and getting something done, then moving on, moving on, moving on. And so it kind of got its start in computer sciences, but now it has really begun to gain traction in manufacturing companies, and you'll see a little evidence of that. In fact, this was an article in the Harvard Business Review back in 2016 called, as you can see, Embracing Agile. And can you read in the back what these things say? Okay, but you can read that, and you can see that it's all really good news, and it's, you know, boosting the motivation and productivity of IT teams, and you'll see a little more evidence of that further on. In fact, we'll make this further on. Particularly in engineering, the development method that had been around for a long time was the Waterfall Method, where you did this. When you completed it in its entirety, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this, and then you took it out to the customer and tried to sell it. And Agile is absolutely the reverse of that. You break it up into small packets. You can revisit any of those levels. You don't have the rigidity of we get everything done in one before we move on to the next. And the HBR had an example of John Deere, the large farm machinery manufacturer, was using these techniques to develop new machines. And here's what they said. The working prototype of a new machine form was developed in 8 months. If everything went perfectly using the traditional process, it would have taken them 1.5 years at best, as much as 2.5 or 3 years. So this is a huge improvement in productivity, but even more importantly, it's getting a new product on the street several months earlier than otherwise would be the case, and that means revenue is coming in. So it's a huge boost to profits. But here was the thing that kind of surprised people. What surprised them was the extent to which this happened. Team engagement and happiness went from the bottom third of company-wide scores to the top third, and quality improved. And then velocity, meaning the amount of work accomplished in each sprint. A sprint was a unit that said, here's what we're going to get done during this period of time. And during that sprint, they accomplished, on average, 200% more work. So double the work. And some achieved 400, one team got 800. So here again, you can see that this has to be as important, as expensive as these employees are, this has to be something that companies can't ignore. I mean, yeah, cannot ignore.
So by using this technique, like, they're able to like just go back and revisit like ideas or problems that they had instead of like completing the like idea and then the issues and having a final product. So like this way they're able to like.
Yeah, partly, but the great question, the real advantage of this is they break things down into very small pieces. And the problem I always had in computer programming is you start developing something this big and you begin dashing off code, and then you go in to try to debug it, and there's just too much there. There are too many moving parts. And this is saying, design it in a way that this is pretty well self-contained and it's pretty quick and easy to check out. So you're eliminating that spaghetti problem where the spaghetti all starts to congeal. Good question. So anyway, this is really catching on just about everywhere. So the origins of the lean Launchpad, which is what these three elements turn into, the person that really did a lot in this is a fellow by the name of Steve Blank, and he started out as an entrepreneur, very much in the high-tech field. He was extremely successful. He then became an investor for a little while, and I think he found that he was making money as an investor, but he was having a lot of disappointments. And he said, why is that so? Why do so many startups fail? And so his goal was to try to figure out how you can improve them. So he taught his first class at Stanford in 2011 on this methodology, and it really consists of these three parts. One of his students was a fellow by the name of Eric Ries, who kind of embodied his work in a book called The Lean Startup. And it basically is talking about how you start with an idea, you immediately take it out to the marketplace to get what the market thinks of it before you've put a lot of resources in it, and you continue this path. Based on what you learn, you either iterate, which is a small change to the business model canvas, or you pivot, which you kind of keep one foot here, but you maybe do this. You make some major changes to it based on what you learn. And at this point, you have spent almost no money. So that is the Lean Launchpad, and we began teaching the Lean Launchpad. Well, we attended Steve's class at Stanford in 2013. The instructors in our department went out there, and we began teaching it actually in 2010, because that's when this was first, this was published. Business Model Canvas was published in the summer of 2010, and in the fall of 2010, we were using it because we were so impressed with what it offered. So there was another article in the HBR which talked about why the lean startup changes everything. And the whole concept is start with an idea, immediately figure out is it valid to turn into a business. And if it isn't, move on. If it is, you keep building on it. And then, as this idea caught on, many governmental agencies began, the National Science Foundation came to Blank and said, you know, we put a lot of money up for people to do work, and we sponsor a lot of scientific work, and we don't have a very good success rate. We think we need your methodology for these people looking for government grants. And so they began peeling some people off and putting them through this training, this innovation core training, and keeping track of the results of what percent of people who had been through this training ended up getting funded versus people who'd applied and had not been through this training. And it was some enormous difference, like 60% of the ones who'd been through the training got funded and 28% of the ones that did not. So they began to really dramatically increase their rate of funding based on the number of people involved. And so now there are 1,000 teams of people teaching this in over 50 universities. It has spread to like the State Department, to the Department of Defense, and it's been modified for each of these uses. But it's showing the power of this, that the government now has begun to realize that, you know, we spend billions of dollars a year of the taxpayers' money. We ought to make sure we're doing it wisely. And here's Hacking for Defense, which is the Department of Defense. Now, one thing that our department does is we focus on entrepreneurship, not intrapreneurship. Intrapreneurship generally talks about in a large company trying to bring those techniques. And they can work, but it can be very ticklish. But it's not the same as being a startup. Generally, a large company has resources behind them. Most startups don't, so that's a major difference. And we try to help the people who don't have money behind them figure out a way to get going. Any questions at this point? Okay. Customer discovery. I think we have a couple of brief videos.
For 21 years, I did 8 startups in a variety of industries. 2 semiconductor companies, enterprise software, video games, consumer electronics, military intelligence, and it was the most exciting thing I could imagine spending my life doing. But now for the last 14 years, I've been an educator. I've been teaching entrepreneurs how to think a different way about startups and how to build their companies in a very efficient way. Hi, I'm Steve Lang. I'm a retired serial entrepreneur. In this series, we're going to talk about 2 big ideas. How are startups different from large companies? And the second thing is something called the lean startup. And inside the lean startup, we're going to talk about the customer development process. We're going to talk about how to build a minimum viable product, how to build prototypes, and then we're going to talk about customer acquisition. How do you actually get out of the building, talk to customers, and then get them to use or buy your product?
Okay, and then this one is one on the lean method. It's a little bit longer. If I can figure out how to launch it. There we go. Thank you.
Turns out that a lean startup consists of 3 components. 1 is business model design, 2 is customer development, and 3 is agile engineering. And these 3 components help startups become incredibly efficient, reducing the amount of time to get the first product and reducing the amount of cash necessary to build that product. So in a lean startup, we really know something quite different than a large company. In a lean startup, we know that you just don't execute per plan. You're actually going to be learning and discovering from customers outside your office. We kind of know that there are no facts inside your building, so you're going to get the heck outside. And we also know that you're not smarter than the collective intelligence of your potential customers. So what we're going to do is put together a process that allows you to rapidly learn by getting out of the building and testing some of your key ideas and key features of the product as quickly and as rapidly as we can. And what you're going to find is a good number of your initial hypotheses are just simply wrong. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to start with writing down all the hypotheses. And the common framework we use is Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas. This 9-box diagram puts all the hypotheses about your business. Who are the customers? What are you building for them? What's the channel? How are you going to reach them? How are you going to make money? And puts them in a single page. So it's going to provide a framework and then a scorecard for us to see how we're doing. But unlike just doing strategy in a large company, you're going to take these hypotheses and go outside the building and actually test them. Not test them randomly, but test them with a formal process called customer development. What we're going to do is design experiments, run the experiments outside the building, get the data, and look for insights